Here we go, David. How you doing?
Okay. Very well, thank you. How are you?
All right, thank you. So today we're going to go through training organization for the JST athletes, um, specifically into how to use JST athlete, not just JST athlete, the other programs and resources that the athletes have access to, like the fixed length programs, the compete program as well. And we also are going to break this down into a little bit more of off-season training and in-season training as well. So we're pretty much covering all bases. And I'm boring David already. Shut up, Jack.
It's because we've already been chatting for almost an hour.
um, cool. So we're going to take a previous week's training that's been quite recent. So we'll be pretty fresh in the athletes' minds as a bit of an example. So we're going to start off with off-season first. And we get plenty of questions on this, on how to organise the training. And obviously when people sign up as well, they sometimes look at the week, the sample week, and they're like, whoa, that's a lot of training. I don't know how I'm going to get that in. So I'm going to just ask you this question first, David. For those people that do initially, maybe look at the week and think, shit, where do I even start? How would you go about processing that week's training and maybe looking to start to put it together so that it's more tailored to you?
So, first of all, how the training is organized in the day is generally how we think would be best for you to attack it if you have all of the time to attack each of the pieces with good quality, and you're not having to rush through sections or completely remove some sections altogether. So that's like the ideal would be to complete it in the order that's already written. However, if you are someone who has potentially limited time, so you're not able to complete all of the sections of the day's training, and maybe that's on a regular basis, so you regularly need to remove some pieces, or it just means on a particular day you have less time than you initially planned, and so you're trying to decide, what do I need to prioritize, what do I need to remove? Then we want to get into deciding, okay, what parts of this program am I gonna do, and what parts am I not going to do? And we spoke earlier, and we were thinking about when you have your training, especially in the off season, there are two things that you can do to make the decision as to what you are going to do or prioritize in your training day, with regard to what order are you going to do the pieces. The first one is, what part specifically to you is important, and that may be that you need to focus more on a more general level. It could be that you need to focus more on conditioning. It could be that you need to focus more on a gymnastics element. It could be that you need to do more running. It could be that you need to focus on your strength, and it could get even more specific than that. And perhaps you've also got onto like a fixed length program, and you want to focus specifically on ring muscle ups or specifically on your squat strength. So that first step is going to be identifying what part of the day's training is the most important to you as an individual. What part do you really want to focus on? And then the second part of that is going to be, depending on what part that you've chosen, what placement throughout the day is going to get you the best stimulus from that part and the best performance through that section of training as well. And we can go into more detail so it makes more sense, that part too.
That's really good. That's really helpful to start with, and we want to try and keep this as simple as possible so that it's applicable to as many scenarios as possible. So I think going into the actual kind of what the prioritization. So we've prioritized what we need to work on for that day, and I think let's go into the actual organization. And for me, this has always worked best, is the thing that I struggle with the most, if it's a movement or if it's a strength piece, that should probably go first most of the time. So what I mean by that is, so I'm going to take this Monday as a quick example, and it's already in the correct order, is I really struggle with legless rope climbs, and I'm looking at the day, and we've got to work out, we've got some conditioning to do. if I was to do the workout of the running first, that's probably going to leave me with a little bit less energy to give into the legless rope climbs, which is the highest skill piece for me, which obviously means I'm going to get less out of it. So by putting that higher skill or that strength piece first, it means I can then give more into that part of the session. I'm full of energy. I've got the most to give then. So I'm ultimately probably going to get the most out of it as well. Is there anything you want to add on that note, David?
No, but I think that just to come at it from the other side, if I were to look at the same day of training, for me, the legless rope climbs are something that I'm very comfortable and confident with. Whereas like the conditioning, specifically maybe the running as well, are two elements that I would want to prioritize. So I would do the opposite to Jack, and I'd be thinking, okay, that legless rope climb session is less of a priority for me. I've got this workout, pumpkin smash, and I've got running. Those are my two priorities. So then you would look at, well, there are two ways I could do. I could do pumpkin smash, the workout, and followed by the running, or I could do them the other way around. And then it's a case of deciding which one is going to have like the biggest like negative effect on the other. And we can look at the intensity, and the running sessions are fairly like easy to moderate intensity, whereas the pumpkin smash is a tough workout. So if we're considering those two things as well, if we do running first and then we've got a really intense workout, we're already a little bit fatigued from that low intensity run, even though it's not huge intensity. Whereas if we prioritize pumpkin smash, the high intensity workout, we're still probably going to have enough juice to do like a decent quality low intensity running session. And so then my day would probably look like pumpkin smash and then the running and then the legless rope climbs, or even pumpkin smash and then the legless rope climbs in the run.
Cool. That sounds really good. If you are short on time, on this day in particular, again, with the prioritization that you've made for that day, I would simply take out one of these sections. So say, for example, you've only got time to do your first priority, which is legless rope climbs for me, and then, one other piece. I would be thinking, right, I'm going to go for obviously the legless rope climbs first, and then whatever piece it is I feel like will help me get the most out of that session, like, great. One other thing to add to that is that looking a little bit more across the week, is there another area where I do need to kind of focus on and put emphasis on? So what I mean by that is for example, if I do pumpkin smash on Monday and I know it's going to put me in the bin and I'm not going to be able to put the same intensity, for example, on the gymnastic spread on the Tuesday, that's where I might be like, right, I'm going to do the running because it's a little bit less intense. Tuesday, I'm going to really look to push this gymnastic spread session and hit, maybe maximal intensity for that week. Because I know another thing that athletes tend to do is they try to go 100% into every single session, which isn't possible. For example, David, if you played basketball, if you was to play a basketball match every single evening, like, you'd be broken within weeks. You'd be broken. It's exactly the same with CrossFit and training as well. So you've got to look at the week or be aware of what's in the rest of the week as well, and pick your battles. Like, throughout the week, there should be probably 2, maybe a maximum of 3 sessions where you should be looking for that kind of maybe maximal intensity where you're going to give that 100% kind of beans into that session as well. Do you want to add anything to that, or maybe give a different perspective to that as well?
Emma and I talk about different intensities that you've described there. We refer to them as different efforts, and we compare the efforts to different milks. So you have we have like skimmed, semi-skimmed, and full fat milk. Here they have let and melon and then normal milk. And we talk about if we use the English version, like the full fat milk is your really, really high intensity work, and then
Mhm.
the skimmed or let milk is the really, really low intensity work, and then the melon or the semi skimmed is in the middle. And if you try to go full fat, high
Mhm.
intensity every single session, and even a higher intensity of those sessions that are supposed to be a bit easier, then you'll find that when you need to go to that high intensity, you eventually can't hold on to it anymore. And those lower intensities, those sessions that should have been easier, that you should have, like you said, pick your battles and decided to do the session at a lower intensity, you pop the intensity up on that one, and then the session comes around that you needed to do at high intensity and you needed to prioritize, you don't have the juice for that one, so then that intensity drops. So instead of having some skimmed and some full fat, you just end up with everything becomes semi-skimmed training, right? So you're putting in a huge amount of effort, but you're not getting as much return back from that because you haven't, like you said, picked your battles. So instead of making everything semi-skimmed, try and like intentionally keep some skimmed and some full fat.
Love that. I had a call with an athlete the last week that follows JC Athlete, and she did everything that was written kind of in the main trunk. She's relatively new to CrossFit, probably been doing CrossFit maybe 6 to 12 months. And she was always feeling sore and kind of struggling to put, her best effort into training, especially when she felt like she needed to. And I said, you're just simply doing too much. You shouldn't be sore every day that you come out of training, and you should be able to, like we just said, pick and choose your battles. So I said, the best thing to do is less. And when you start to come out of training not feeling sore in every session, great. Like your body's actually starting to recover now. And it's one of them where you need to find how much volume is right for you. So the best way to do that is start with the minimal amount. And then as you become a bit more accustomed to that, look to add other little bits in. Okay. Don't start with more, not be able to do it, fall off the bandwagon and think and just, completely lose all motivation and everything else. Start with the minimal. Make sure you can recover. Make sure everything around training is on point. Right, that's all good. Oh, I'm going to try adding this extra little session in, or little part of the session in, going forward for
Mm,
the next couple of weeks. Ah,
mm,
I'm feeling all right. Maybe I'm not even feeling all right. I drop it back down, or I can put it up a little bit more again. Less is better to start. And then once you feel like you've adapted, then start to add things in. Don't start with a maximal and then just completely break down.
yeah,
That
yeah.
makes sense? Do you have anything to add to that? Or I don't know,
Uh,
maybe
I
similar.
couldn't agree more, and
Mhm.
I couldn't agree more with that approach to like managing your training volume and understanding what volume works for you. And I just want to add to that that does not change depending at what level you are competing at. That's the same for the elite as it is for the RX and for the intermediate and the complete novice. And to give an example, Emma and I, after a couple competitions, have now begun our training for our next phase. And what we have done for this first week is effectively choose what we know to be like the lowest end of the volume that's going to give us some results. And then over the coming weeks, we are planning on building the volume and progressing, with the complexity of movements and the loading and so on. But the main thing is that we are starting. We know that our capacity from years of experience may be like this, and we are intentionally starting down here to give ourselves room to progress, so that by the time we get to this point, it's essentially right before a deload, so we can hold on to that for that last week, and then we drop it down again and we repeat. If we were to start at that maximum volume from week one, by week two, we're destroyed, and by week three, we're injured. It's demotivating, and it's not good for motivation. It's not good for progression or like health in the sport. So, yeah, I think it's a great idea for people to start at the lower end of the volume, and then gradually work their way up until they find that this is the maximum I can sustain. And then that's some great feedback for you as an athlete, and it helps you manage your volume in the week.
And I think, again, just coming back to GST athlete and being a bit more specific here, that by doing less, that might mean, to start off with, the first couple of weeks or the first couple of phases that you join the program, you might just be choosing 2 of the sections rather than, the 3 to start, because that's where it's like, right, I'm working out myself as an athlete, how better to prioritize what I need to really do in my training. What are your low hanging fruits on each day? Okay, so you're developing as an athlete by learning to prioritize better, which is super important, because you can't get better at everything at the same time. It's just not possible. And if you do try and do that, you become overwhelmed. So don't try and do that to start off with. And then, like I say, if you feel like training's going well, you're staying consistent, then we add that extra section in. Okay, so again, heed our advice, okay, and don't do too much to start.
Just to add to that as well, that you can't get everything better at everything at the same time doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do all parts of the program at the same time, because obviously when we program the weeks and like different phases of training, we are focusing on specific things. So this is more a case of, for those of you who can't manage the whole volume of a training day, this is how you would select what you were doing. 100%. But if you are in the other group of people that can manage the volume of the same of the whole day and the whole week, which is majority of people that are following JST athlete, then we're going to get onto that next. So like, how do you organize that day as well?
Let's go into that now then.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get stuck into that, and let's go through JST athlete, and how, if you were someone that can apply the time and do all the sections, how you would best kind of split it up if you feel like you had to, or how you best principles to follow, I guess.
So we spoke earlier and said about like 2 things that you want to look at is A, what's a priority for you as an individual, and then B, how does that priority fit into the training day the best so that you can get the most out of that session. So a very common one is strength or weightlifting. I need to get better at my weightlifting. I need to get stronger. So if you as an individual identify that as something that is, as Jack said, a low hanging fruit, so by improving in that area, that's going to give you the best like overall improvement to your whole CrossFit game. Then you want to then look at the training day and figure out where in the training day is best for me to put that weightlifting and strength session, so that I can A, have like the most juice to perform on it well and get therefore like the best stimulus from it. And B, also a slight consideration is like the recovery from the session as well. So we can have a look at, for instance, JST athlete on the Friday. Friday session, we have, or actually that's not the Friday, because that's quite an easy one. We've only got 2 parts in that day. But then we can go for the Wednesday. So we've got upper body strength work, we've got that workout spin class, and we've also got machine-based intervals. So we've got quite a big machine-heavy, machine bias day with the conditioning. If I'm someone that wants to prioritize my strength, then I'm probably going to keep that in the same order that it is there. Reason being, when the energy systems that we are using when we're doing like weightlifting or strength work, they tend to fatigue very easily. And so when you are freshest, in the first thing in the morning, or like after, before you've done other training sessions, is when you want to be attacking your weightlifting and strength work. If I were to do that the other way around and be doing those 2 workouts beforehand, even if I have a sizable amount of recovery between the sessions, I'm still probably not going to perform as well on that upper body strength work as if I'd put it first thing in the day. How do you feel about that?
How long between sessions do you usually take? And another one that I want to ask you as well is, so do so say you had a strength session that was first, do you try and do it so that it's X amount of hours after you've got up as well, or anything like that? How would you kind of, how long between sessions, and do you take that into consideration? How many hours after you get up? Yeah. Do you want to go into that?
So now we get into some things that could be very individual for you, based off of your schedule of your day with regard to work and other commitments that you have outside of training. Your eating pattern. Are you someone that likes to have a lighter breakfast, a bigger breakfast, or maybe you don't have breakfast at all? And then also how all those things interact. I think as an ideal, you would want to get up and fuel for the session that you are having. So you'd have a decent sized breakfast. How big that is will depend on how comfortable you are in eating before the session. Some people like to eat lighter, less, like have a smaller breakfast and bigger meals after training, some the other way around. That may also depend on the conditioning session. If you have a lower intensity conditioning session, maybe like some yogurt and a banana is enough. If you've got like a big weightlifting session, maybe you want to have like a bigger, more carb dense meal with a little bit longer to digest that before you do the session. That's going to be up to you and your schedule. But between sessions, I would definitely say a minimum of 2 to 3 hours. And within that time period, we're looking at something very quickly after the session to recover, especially like some like high density of carbs, and then ideally another meal in that gap as well, so that by the time you get to the second session, you've replenished glycogen stores and like already started the recovery process from the first session, and B, you've got some extra food in as well to make sure that you're like fueling up for the following session as well.
Perfect. Good. We just to touch on like the biases as well. So we do actually put some guidance in of how to organize the rest of your training. If you are following the bias parts. So for example, again, looking at this Wednesday that we've just been talking about now, you've put complete this instead of today's upper body strength. If you do today's machine-based intervals, only complete A, B, and C. What if someone can split the day into 2 sessions and be doing like the strength bias stuff as an example? Would you still say to follow that guidance, or if someone can do a strength session on its own and then another session on its own later on, like, does the guidance stay the same? Is it different? Yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think you've actually almost answered this question, Jackie. It kind of pulls us back around to what you said earlier about managing or starting off with the lower end of the volume and then potentially increasing until you get to something that's challenging to sustain. And I think in that scenario, if we have someone that has the space to do 2 sessions, first of all, definitely be hitting the strength bias first. When you are freshest, the most well-fueled and most rested to be able to do the session, which is going to be earlier on in the day. And then if you do have the time to do a second session, and that session is a decent amount of time away from the strength bias session, I would say start with doing the recommended volume that we've given there, which is only parts A, B, and C. And follow that recommendation for, say, a week, which is like a decent amount of time to stick to the same volume before making any changes. And then take note of how you feel on that Sunday, and then also take note of how you're performing in the following week. Are you able to make progression from what you did the previous week? Are you able to make progression and still stick to the specified reps in reserve or rate of perceived exertion, RPE? And if you are able to do those things, then you can look at potentially adding in a little bit more of that conditioning volume. And that way you are making sure you're taking care of your priorities, which are A, performing on the strength work, and B, making progression from week to week. And I think the progression aspect is the part that people potentially forget about, because it would be easy to prioritize the strength work. So you have that as your first session, you hit it hard, you get a good stimulus from it, and then you do a big chunk of conditioning in the evening. But if going week to week, you're not actually making progress, you're not able to add on kilos or reps or time under tension, whatever it is, then although you're performing on those sessions, that conditioning could potentially be harming your recovery, so that you're not able to actually get the adaptation between the weeks. So pay attention to those the two things, the performance and also like the progression between weeks.
That's a huge thing as well that you just mentioned about the progressions, is that like people are going in too hard in week one, and then like you say, by week three they might have been able to progress a little bit week two, but by week three they're like stuck. And then again, that whole thing where it's like, oh, I'm not progressing now, and it's like, well, the reason is you've gone too big too soon. It's getting to know yourself better as an athlete, and some, like we said already, to start off with a little bit less is actually more, because you can then look to build some momentum going forward, which again is just gonna keep you on that roll and make you more consistent, and and give you room to progress as well. Are there any exceptions to the rule with regards to order of sessions? So say, for example, I'm someone that's pretty even across the board at everything. How would you then get organized people to organize the training? So say, for example, if we dive into, I don't know, like Tuesday as an example, we've got the weightlifting and strength gymnastics spread. They want to do the rowing progressions as well. Like, how would you guide people through that session there?
So we're talking about, is it always the case that we would want to do the session we would want to place the session in a way that is the best possible performance for that session? Or are we talking about, is it always we do weightlifting first, and does it depend on the individual?
Number two of what you said there, is it always weightlifting first? It's like if you're even across the board.
Right. So I suppose in my experience, I think we have like this three potential three groups of people that would benefit from having their conditioning before their weightlifting.
Okay.
Or three scenarios. Scenario number one would be if conditioning is the priority for you, as we've spoken about with the weightlifting and strength stuff. If your weightlifting and strength numbers are at a point where your strength is a strength for you and your conditioning is more of a weakness, then for you it's going to make more sense to prioritize doing your conditioning earlier in the day, when you have more ability to hold the intensity that is required for that conditioning better. And whether that's high intensity or low intensity doesn't matter. If your conditioning is the weakest, it's going to benefit you more to have the conditioning earlier on in the day or before the weightlifting strength work. The second group would be some individuals hold, and I know I've been like this in the past, hold a lot of tension or are very generally quite stiff, and find it much easier to get into the positions that are required for weightlifting and strength work, even after movement mechanics work, if they've already done some conditioning in the day. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every morning has to start with a 90 to 100% effort metcon. It could be that they do like low intensity conditioning as well. But if you're one of those people that find that you move much better doing your through weightlifting and strength work after you've already done something that gets you a bit warm and sweaty in the morning, then you may want to do that. With that being said, that means that you also, at the same time as you're doing that, you also want to be attacking your mobility and stability to find out what is the reason why you cannot get into those that deep overhead squat or front rack position and so on that you need for weightlifting, because you can't always rely on having the conditioning beforehand. But that could be a somewhat kind of like short to medium term solution for you if it makes you perform better, because you can get into better positions of the weightlifting.
Yeah.
And then the third group would be if you are someone who is fairly well balanced and you don't have to put your weightlifting and strength work first. It would be good to switch it, not necessarily every week, but just every now and then, just so that you can actually get the experience of what it's like to lift, having slightly like tired or sore legs, or slightly tired or sore like lats or core or triceps from doing like a longer skiing piece in the morning. It's useful for competition, because we know that very rarely in competitions are we in such a rested state that we can perform optimally on all the lifting. So it's a good experience for that, and it's also good just to keep like some variation in the training too.
I think that's we're going to come to that next, but I think that's a big thing is we give athletes through the program and our service the tools, everything they need to help them along their journey to becoming, the best athletes that they can. But it requires on the athlete side of things to, be curious and explore some different scenarios sometimes when it comes to the training. Like you just said in the last one, you're not always going to be fresh going into, an event at a competition because of the previous day's events. Like you need to replicate that in your training. So let's get stuck now into, so we talked then about kind of off-season training. Let's get stuck into the in-season training, okay, and how that now differs from off-season training. So just jumping on the back of that last point that you made, that is probably one of the scenarios where you may change your training around a little bit so that you're getting different feels, different, sorts of fatigue when going into different aspects of the sessions. And that's something you specifically train and what you'd recommend for other athletes as well?
So when we're training, it's all about sticking to the goal of where you are in the season. And we always make this clear on JST Athlete. This is the phase that we are doing. These are the goals and focuses of this phase. We always go through, as you say, like the what, the why, and the how, so that all the athletes are informed as to what they're doing, how they're supposed to do it, and why they're doing it that way. That applies to like the off season and the in season as well. So when you're in off season, you're away from competition. The focus, the goals of training there are to improve in whatever areas you're trying to improve in. And that training differs to pre-competition, where your focus is on optimizing your performance to be able to compete. And that means that everything that you're doing in that pre-competition phase or in-season phase is very much geared towards simulating competition scenarios and getting yourself ready to perform in workouts that are likely to be in a competition. So we've spoken about off-season training, where if strength and weightlifting was a priority, you would put that when you're freshest in the day. When we move into in-season, or pre-competition, we're going to also be taking into consideration what scenarios are we going to be lifting in. And the likelihood is that we are going to be lifting in a fatigue state. It's very popular for competitions to start, especially on the first day, with a longer, more enduring event. And if not that, then it's usually very likely that we're lifting after we've already had several events throughout the day, or at least the weekend. And that also applies to online as well, online stages, the open quarterfinals, when we had the online semifinals as well. So when we're looking at that, if it's at a point where you've got a competition within the next, say, I would say 1 to 1.5 months, you would probably want to be looking at placing some of your weightlifting and strength sessions, especially the ones that are more towards testing your strength. So building up to like maximal lifts, Olympic lifts, power lifts. You may want to look at placing some of those later on in the day after you've already done some conditioning pieces. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get an adaptation to that session because you are tired going into it. You will still adapt to that session, but more importantly, you'll get the experience of having lifted with tired legs, a giant, like just being systemically generally tired from doing a session in the morning, high or low intensity. And so that when you get to competition, you are not deciding your lifts and banking off of numbers that you've only ever hit fresh. And B, when you go to pick up that barbell and it feels heavy, you're used to that feeling. It's not an unknown to you. It's kind of removing one of the unknowns so that you can feel a little bit more comfortable.
I think that's the big thing as well, is during that period, you know, that 1 to 1.5 months before the competition, it's removing as many of the uncertainties as possible to give you more confidence going into the weekend for whatever is coming up. That's kind of the goal, or should be one of the main focuses in that 4 to 6 week lead up towards competition, because in that period, yeah, you've got a chance to still get fitter or a little bit stronger, but it's actually the, you know, the finer details in and around our sport, like how do I feel going from this movement to this movement? How do I feel doing the weightlifting piece after, I don't know, like a gymnastic heavy workout a couple of hours before? It's exploring all those factors that are going to, like I say, make you more confident and allow you to strategize each workout and, you know, piece of training that you're doing to the best of your ability as well. Is there,
With that,
go on
as well, just when you said about the changes that you make to training for competition, as we're on the note making changes to training schedule and potential to sessions, is what we can go into just very quickly to sessions too. When we're in the off season, a lot of these sessions that we just set them up in the way that best gets you the intensity or like the that you want from the workout. So for instance, if we have a workout like bonfire, that's a great one to use as an example, the white ball workout on Saturday. That workout was 21:59 thrusters, dumbbell thrusters, and both box jump over straight into 15:12:9 double dumbbell ground to overhead and double under. Now, when we're doing this in kind of like off-season style, you put all your equipment nice and close together. You'd hit the workout with fast transitions, minimal time and space between equipment, so you can get like the fastest time possible, the best score. If we're looking at this workout in a pre-competition setting, we might want to start thinking about how would you have this workout laid out on the competition floor. If you've done some competitions before, you'd likely know that they generally put you in a way where you progress down the floor. So you may want to look at doing your first set of 21 dumbbell thrusters, move your dumbbell forwards, go back to the box, come to the box, back to the dumbbells, do your set of 15, move the dumbbells forward, back to the box. And then the same thing with moving them forward throughout the dumbbell ground to overhead. Maybe you move your rope forward every set as well. So in that scenario, instead of it being fast transitions, minimal space between equipment, we potentially have slightly longer transitions, more space between equipment. But the trade-off is that we're simulating the same kind of situation that we're going to be in a competition. So because that's a priority at that point, pre-competition and season.
That's awesome. So, David, just to summarize everything that we've gone through there, let's go through our kind of key points for off-season training first and organization of training.
So sorry, go on.
Go on. Yeah, what are your key principles that you would advise athletes that they have in the back of their mind when organizing training?
So first of all is what elements of training are a priority to you? And then secondly, how do we organize what order is best to put that element within the day so that you get the most out of that element that you most need to work on? And this is the same for if you are in the group of people who you do not have the time, or you cannot tolerate the whole volume in the program, so you are not able to do everything that is in the training day currently. Or if you're in the second group that you do have the time to do all the training that's in each training day, but you want to choose which parts to prioritize, or you just want to know how to organize the training day in the way that's best for you as an individual. generally it's best to put the thing that is the biggest priority to you, or your weakness that you need to work on the most, earlier in the day, first thing in the training day, because that's when you have the most energy and you are the least fatigued and can therefore perform the best on it.
Yeah.
A potential exception to this, or at least a consideration, is if you are weaker in conditioning, but there is also a high skill element throughout in the day as well, which could be high skill gymnastics, ring muscle ups, bar muscle ups, handstand variations, or weightlifting. You may want to consider if it's actually best for you to put your conditioning before the weightlifting, because you don't want to be so tired, or the gymnastics, because you don't want to be so tired that you can't perform those complex skills well. So that would be the exception there.
Perfect. So that covers our off-season training. For our in-season training, I think one of the first key thing was be curious and start to explore and play around with the order of training a little bit more. So it could be that you do your higher skill elements first, and then follow it up with weaker skill elements, but then the next day you might flip that around. But I think the main purpose is that you go into each training session knowing exactly why you're doing it in that order, and what you want to get out of that session is the main thing that I took from what you said before, David. Please add anything in there that you feel like you would like to add or I've missed.
I think you've hit it bang on there. It's about being, that curiosity is essentially going to serve the purpose of predicting or simulating all the different scenarios in which you might have to do different types of workouts. Yeah. When we put it into the program, or when you're doing it yourself in the off seasons we've just discussed, you're putting it in the order that's going to give you the best possible stimulus and performance on the workout. Mm-hmm. When we're pre-competition or in season, we're just essentially trying to simulate all the different kind of scenarios that we might have to lift, do gymnastics, do conditioning at the competition. And as that always changes, it's best to also do the same thing in your training as well, and change the order around regularly so that you're prepared for competition and you remove another unknown, which is, what does it feel like to max out my clean after a 5K run in the morning, that kind of thing.
Wicked. That was brilliant, mate. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Jack.
And I'm sure the athletes will have some revelations after listening to this for sure, because I've had plenty of conversations like this recently.
If only we had someone telling us this stuff when we started. I don't know how lucky they are.
If only we had this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
No, cool. Thanks, David. That was awesome.
Thank you, man. Cheers.